Hi, Tom.
Hey, Vanessa.
Welcome to our inaugural podcast, where we talk to people whose writings and ideas and thoughts may just be the thing that gets us through this weird fucking time that we are living through. And so we're kicking it off with our first one with Mr. I'm going to mispronounce it. Here we go. Tomer Persico?
Persico.
Persico.
So Tomer Persico is a known commodity in Israel. He is, to use a phrase I detest, one of the most prominent public intellectuals writing about politics, identity, the lot. He actually has a really interesting relationship with religion, which we'll get into. He is a visiting scholar at UC Berkeley, and his new book, which does not yet have a title, is about the image of God. Now, this is an idea that is familiar to anybody who, unlike Vanessa, has read the book of Genesis, that humanity was created in God's image. But Tomer makes the argument that this little seed of an idea had world-shaping consequences. We talk about the origin and evolution of this idea, about how through Christianity it has permeated Europe and even led eventually to, ironically, atheism. We also talked about identity politics, the crisis of meaning in the West, the cult of authenticity, and the crisis of the liberal world. We covered a lot.
Yes. Now, I will say, if you're like me and you were not brought up with any religion whatsoever, a Bible was never put in your hand, Old Testament or New, you might be wondering...
It was, in fact, snatched from your hand and sent spiraling through the window.
So if you're like me, you might be wondering, what the hell is the image of God? What does that even mean? Do not fret. Tomer is excellent at breaking down this concept.
So let's just get into it.
Let's just listen to our first episode, our first interview with Tomer Persico.
You're the first person that we're trying this with, hence some of our technical difficulties, perhaps. But
thank you for being our guinea pig.
Yeah, exactly. We really feel privileged to have this conversation with you and to launch it off with you. So thank you. So make sure that I get the title right. You're the visiting assistant professor of Jewish studies in Berkeley.
I'm the correct visiting assistant professor in the Institute for Jewish Law and Israel Study at UC Berkeley, yes. And I'm also the Shalom Hartman Scholar in Residence in the Bay Area for these 2 and going for 3 years.
Give us a podcast-friendly introduction to what that means and what it means, the kind of work that you do, and also how your background and elements of faith play into it.
Wow. Okay, that's actually a long story. I mean, as far as my job is concerned, I'm in the university. I'm obviously a professor, so I'm teaching courses on Jewish studies and Israel studies. I teach Introduction to Jewish Mysticism, and I teach a course on contemporary Judaism in Israel, in which I take the advantage to try to ask what is modern Jewish identity or identities in general, and that's what I do there. So that's pretty standard. As the Bay Area Scholar in Residence for the Hartman Institute, I teach different groups in the Bay Area, and and all over. Certainly before the coronavirus struck, I was flying around also. But I teach different groups. It's groups of entrepreneurs or businessmen or religious professionals or young, promising Jewish talents, etc., in the Bay Area, and with the Hartman agenda, which is Jewish peoplehood and liberal traditional Judaism, let's say, widely read, let's say. So that's basically my job. Now, my own personal life and how it configures into that, again, that's quite a story. I mean, I was born in Haifa to a completely secular family. an atheist family. And it is only when I became a young adult that I discovered the Jewish tradition. It was through the not very original, actually, after the army trip to India, which is, it's pretty much mandatory in Israel. After your mandatory army service, you go to the mandatory trip to the East. And there I discovered, let me put it bluntly, spirituality, or even more bluntly, God. Pardon me. And coming back to Israel, I knew I wanted to study philosophy and religion, and studying that, I thought it's pretty absurd not actually studying my own tradition, and I started to do that academically and non-academically. So, I mean, I don't know how deep you want me to go into that story, but basically that's how I got into Jewish studies and religious studies, and so here I'm also I don't know, living as I guess traditional Jew and maybe a religious Jew.
Where did you find God? In India.
In India.
Okay. So coming to India as a total convinced atheist, I told myself, okay, I'm here. I mean, I actually wanted to go to the States after the army trip. I wanted to go to the United States. That's actually what I wanted to do. But
I wonder what you would have found if you'd gone there.
Yeah. I
quite a different God.
I'd be on Wall Street or something like that. But my army friends were all going to India, and I wanted to hang out with them. So I came with them to India, and I told myself, as long as I'm in India, I'm going to check out all these gurus and ashrams and yoga and meditation and Buddhism and Hinduism and whatnot, and prove to myself that it's all nonsense, and go back to leading a normal, let's say, quote unquote, life in Israel. And I did. I circled the whole of the subcontinent, and I went to dozens of ashrams, and met all sorts of interesting teachers, and did prove to myself that a lot of that is nonsense. A lot of that is bullshit. But some is actually real, is actually worthwhile. I mean, actually teaches you amazingly profound things about yourself and the world and your connection to the world and your relationship with the world. And I thought, oh my God, I mean, this actually is something very deep. And that's when I started, again, being blunt, my spiritual quest, so to speak. And really, if I have to point out one specific technique, it would be Vipassana meditation, Buddhist meditation, Vipassana, which I practiced on different occasions in India, and right from the first course, I did a 10-day course. I really found out. I understood that this is something significant that, again, teaches me a lot about myself. So that was the beginning of my journey.
So how did that translate into Judaism? Is that just something the craving for spirituality is just something that you could have superimposed any other faith on?
I mean, I could have stayed a Vipassana practitioner and that's it. But for a few reasons, I turned to Judaism, and really, I don't know how. I mean, this is turning into a religious podcast. I hope to stay with it. But I'll say, first of all, simply for the very prosaic reason that I am Jewish and this is my tradition, and I can read Hebrew 2,000-year-old texts in the original tongue, and it simply is preposterous, I thought, for me to read a translation of Greek philosophy and translation of Sanskrit spirituality and not read the actual, let's say, Talmud and whatnot, or Kabbalah in the original tongue. So that's that first. Second, I always wanted also to influence my society, to try to improve my society. And I understood quite early that in Israel, excuse me for the noises. These are, of course, my kids that have been for 5 months without school. So, you'll have to bear them, and believe me, I have to bear them a lot more. Anyway, I was saying I wanted to influence the Israeli society, and I understood that in order to do so, you have to know how to speak Jewish. You have to know to delve into your tradition, into our tradition, and raise the resources that are there and to use them. You can't do it just by professing liberalism, which I don't, which is important also, but it's not enough in Israel. So that was also another reason for studying Judaism, and another reason is, and here again, this is a bit religious. I hope it's okay. What I found, what I felt as, or as my relationship with the divine evolved, I felt that which I was in relationship with is not a void, and it is not emptiness. It is some sort of fullness and goodness. And with all my immense debt to the Buddhist tradition and to its practice, meditative practice that I learned, it was not in the end something, it couldn't satisfy, or it didn't fit into what I understood again as my relationship with the divine. And really, again, not saying that other people's relationship with whatever that is cannot be different. But for me, it was something more resembling the monotheistic, benevolent entity than something that is selfless and void, and etc. So that was another maybe more personal reason why to turn to Judaism, and that's what I did.
I want to get back to the political side of this a little later,
Sure.
But what you're saying right now is actually is a good lead up to
good segue
to your book, because you still ended up defaulting to Judaism. And it just made more sense to you. The language made more sense to you, the mental language of it, or the language of spirituality in it. So, and I feel like that's a lot what your book is about. So I want to get to your book, but I actually don't know if it has an official title yet.
I don't. It doesn't have an official title. It's going to be something like The Image of God and how this idea changed the modern West, or shaped the modern West and Judaism, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so give us the elevator pitch for the book, and then we're going to dig in.
Yeah, but I will say, this book is not a religious book, and it's even not about spiritual journeys. It's actually a history of ideas, or a cultural history, in which I try to show how fundamental was the idea of the image of God in the evolution of what we know as our world, the modern West. And again, this is not even an original, thesis. Obviously, I think it's obvious to anyone who studies this that this idea was seminal in the West's evolution. But I think I make the case in a way that hasn't been made before. And so I don't know how broad you wanted to talk about the book right now, but I go from antiquity till modernity and show certain signposts or certain key junctions in which this idea or this principle really was very transformative.
Can we dive into that principle, this idea of the image of God? Because you say it's not terribly original for anyone who's well versed in this area of study, but I am definitely not versed in this area of study, and so I hadn't really heard about this concept before. So would you mind kind of breaking it down for someone like me who maybe hasn't come across it before? What do you mean when you say the image of God?
Well, we have verses in the first chapters of Genesis, which tell us that man was created in the image of God. Man, including here woman also, and there's another verse that actually spells this out: Zachar v'nekeva bara'otam, male and female, God created them, which is people which are in the image of God. So these verses are pretty straightforward. Now, we can ask, what does that actually mean? Mm-hmm. And indeed, our sages and our tradition, and then the Christian tradition, indeed asked, what does that exactly mean? But in a very basic term, that's simply what the Bible states. Now, the idea of people being created in divine image is not a Jewish invention or a Hebrew invention, as if we want to be more precise for the ancient tradition. It's not a Hebrew invention. It was around in the Mesopotamian area. The Egyptians knew about it. The Babylonians knew about it. But the novelty that the Jewish tradition introduces is making everybody in the image of God. Because let's say if we take the very famous Babylonian epic or Mesopotamian epic, Gilgamesh, the legend of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was created in the image of God. He was created in the image of the god Anu, the god of the sky. But it was only him that was created in the image of God. And obviously that's why he was king and he was a hero and he defeated many monsters and whatever, right? What the Jewish tradition does, whoever wrote Genesis does, is designate everybody, all people, as being made in the image of God. And then we can ask, what does that exactly mean, etc. But the very first thing that we must understand is this is a very universal trait, and really, if for Babylonia or Assyria, the legend of or the mythology revolves around a certain person made in the image of God, we now need to understand that the Hebrew mythology will revolve around all people, around humanity. And so indeed, we have the Tower of Babel, and we have Noah and his family and the whole of humanity. That's the story. That's what happens. That's who we are following in our divine narrative of adventure, right? Not some hero, Gilgamesh, specifically, but the whole of humanity. And then out of humanity, you've got this certain nation that has a covenant with the divine, etc., etc. We know the story, right?
Mm-hmm. To oversimplify it, the story that you're telling is how this idea that, textually at least, is traced back to the Hebrew Bible, has instilled in the culture that then became Judeo-Christian culture this idea of the universality of human dignity. Is that correct?
I mean, yeah, that's it's correct. But the question is how. I mean, again, the question that we must ask is, what does that mean? Okay, obviously people are important if they were created in the image of God. It lends some sort of significance to each and every person. But how and what does that mean? And so now and if we go to the Bible or we go to the sages of the Talmud, actually, and you might be surprised to know this, that actually for them, the image of God simply means the physical contours of the divine body. So for the Bible and for the Talmudic sages, people resemble the divine physically. And I know this sounds totally maybe ludicrous to us today, but that's actually, and you can bring any number of evidence for this. in the writings of the sages. And I'll give you one. When the sages discuss why is it halachically decreed that you must take down a hanged person.
That is just to translate to the non-Jews among us. That means why is it decreed by the law of the Torah?
Actually, I didn't know there were no Jews here. Okay,
it's one present and hopefully a couple of listening.
So, hello everybody. Nice to speak to you also. Yeah. So obviously, so we're talking about the divine law, the halakha. It's the law that traditionally the Jews kept, and one of the clauses there is that when you execute a person by hanging, you must take them down after one day. You can't leave the body hang there, and we know that in the ancient world, people were left hanging all the time. I mean, even 200 years ago, people in cages and people on spikes and whatever, we know, right? And halachically, that's not allowed. And the sages, they try to explain why is it not allowed. And one way of them explaining it is that it's through a parable of two brothers, twins. One is the king, and one is his twin. And that twin, the non-king one, committed some crime, and he's hanged. And if people see this person hanged, they will think that the king is hanged, right? They would think actually that their king is dead, and that can't be. And so we need to take that person down after he's hanged. And the analogy is, of course, humans and the divine. If we see a man hanged, we are seeing as if God hanged, and that, of course, is something that we can't allow. So we need to take this person down, etc. And this is, again, just one piece of evidence for how they thought that the actual contours of the body resemble the divine.
So in that case, hanging the person isn't the desecration, it's the visual aspect of everyone seeing the dead body.
Yeah, that's bad because it's as if you're seeing God there, right? Hanged, right? And of course, we immediately think about Christianity, which actually sees God. And of course, but let's not get into that. But it's quite possible that they are also polemicizing against their Christian, brothers, rivals that are now becoming the quickly ascending, dominating religion. But anyway, but that's, again, just one piece of evidence. So the sages of the Talmud thought that each and every human was very, very important. And each and every one was important because we all resemble the divine. Now, what they also would say is that even though we resemble the divine, our faces are different. And that's something special or something idiosyncratic for the divine figure, that the face is always different. So each and every person has a different face, but still we all resemble the divine.
It's almost like the Game of Thrones god of million faces, the many-faced god. Yeah.
Oh. I didn't see the series, unfortunately, but yeah.
So in this idea, we already have the concept of universal humanity, but also the grain of individualism.
Right, exactly. And that's very important. It's not only that everybody is important, but it's that each and every person is important in and of themselves. And the sages say this explicitly. They are themselves important. And then and now, how do we know that they are all important? This already plays out in the biblical and then halachic post-biblical laws of Judaism. Let's give examples. One example is that, and this is already in the chapter 5 of Genesis, right? And just a minute, let me. I'm sorry, it's chapter 9. In Hebrew, שופך דם האדם, באדם דמו ישפך, כי בצלם אלוהים עשה את האדם. Whoever spills the blood of man will spill his blood, because man was created in divine image. So this is a pretty straightforward law that says if you kill someone, you will be killed.
And
right?
that concept is a departure from the Near East in terms of law.
Exactly. And this is what we need to understand, that it's not only that you will be punished severely for killing a person because each and every person was made in the image of God. It's that you will be punished and not someone else will be punished. Now you may think, well, obviously the killer will be punished. But in the Near East, in the whole Mesopotamian area, it was quite the custom that if someone killed somebody, first of all, you may give money instead of being killed. I mean, you can pay a fine, right, and sort of fine yourself out of execution. But even more than that, it's not that every person was given enough subjectivity, enough accountability to even be able to be punished. And I'll give an example, I'll give an example from a Babylonian law. It's from the laws of Hammurabi, right? Hammurabi, a Babylonian king from the 18th century BCE, and this is just again one law out of many that says, if you're a builder of a house, and out of an accident, let's say your hammer falls, you're building the roof, the hammer falls and kills the son of the owner of the house, right? You're building a house for someone else. Your son will be killed. You killed someone's son, your son will be killed. Why is that? Why are you not killed? You're not killed because neither son is considered a fully developed legal subject. Neither son is an individual, really, in how we would think about it. And so a person's son, or a person here meaning a man that is the head of a family, a pater familias, the patriarch, right? A patriarch's son or wife or sheep or cattle or whatever, or slaves, are part of his own individuality, or really of his own extended body and agency and accountability, right? So they're not people in and of themselves. So if I kill someone's son, in the logic of an eye for an eye, a hand for a hand, etc., if I kill someone's son, my son is killed. I am punished by way of having my son dead. But obviously my son is not connected at all to that accident in which I killed someone, right? Now the Bible changes that. The Bible says, if you spill someone's blood, you will be killed. Because in the image of God, God created man, right? So it's really the beginning of individuality, the beginning of accountability, the beginning of seeing of each and every person as a legal subject, as an individual legal subject. Something that, again, today we take for totally granted, but it was very much, it was a novelty at the time.
It's something that made me think a lot of how this, in retrospect and looking back, is a very successful evolutionary strategy for a small nation in diaspora. If you put so much emphasis on the sanctity of the individual, of the body, then that developed obviously the rules of hygiene and preservation, and that allowed Jews kind of to survive those 2,000 years of diaspora.
Yeah, I mean, it puts emphasis on the body. It puts emphasis on this world. You're not waiting to go over to the next world, and so you can neglect your physical, emotional, psychological being in this world. You have to take care of what's here and now, because you yourself, it's not your soul, it's your body that is most important. Of course, moving into defining the soul or some inner entity as the image of God, which is what Christianity did, gives us other advantages and gives us other ways in which our story really progresses. right?
Right. So now let's jump forward. So what does Christianity do? What does Paul do to evolve this idea of the image of God?
Okay, so really, what we're talking here about Saint Paul the Apostle, which is a figure that, I mean, you cannot exaggerate the importance of this single individual. I think in any list of the three most important people ever, Paul the Apostle is in. I mean, it's I have no doubt. And what Paul does, I mean, this, and you know, I don't know. Let's introduce Paul to the Jewish listeners. We're talking about a first century Jew from Tarsus, from what is today then Asia Minor, today Turkey, who was a zealot against the Christians and hunted Christians down. We're talking about the first century, so it's really just small groups of new believers in Jesus as the Messiah. And then he has a turn of heart. He's born again. He has a conversion experience in which he hears Christ calling him to join him, and he does, and suddenly he's a Christian. Okay? Now, being a Christian, he's not satisfied with just laying back and believing. He takes it upon himself to be the apostle to the Gentiles, to bring the good word to basically the entire Mediterranean. And he goes on 4 different expeditions, around the Mediterranean Sea, Italy, Cyprus, Greece, etc. I mean, the whole Mediterranean. It's really impressive. The energy and the creativity of this person, because he not only went and spoke, he also basically created Christianity as we know it today. He laid down the theological framework of what is today Christianity, because Jesus, he talked, he had a lot of nice parables, but not a lot of principles by which now we are going to build a church and an institution and communities and a society, right? And Paul gradually does that. Okay, now what does Paul do with the image of God? Paul basically, what he does with everything is internalize the image of God. The image of God for Paul is no longer the actual physical contours, the physical frame of the human body. It is something internal. It is connected to him, to that transformation, to that transformative conversion experience. He uses the word metamorphosis a few times in his letters to the different communities of Christians. And so when we approach Christ, when we take on Christ, when we believe, when we are converted, we are redeemed, of course, of original sin, and our image of God is redeemed of whatever stain was it caught when Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden. And here is what's important for us, because when the image of God gets internalized, that means it has enormous significance for history, for Western history, because that means that the body becomes less important, the psyche or the mental facilities or the emotional facilities or the soul, what Paul would designate it, becomes more important. And that opens the gate to an understanding that really, I'm using quote marks here, that like actually, that deeply, profoundly, that in the most essential way, all people are the same. Okay? Now, this idea is already potentially there in the image of God, but Paul works it out and articulates it. And there are a few verses in which he actually says this, and let me quote one, which I hadn't prepared before in English, so allow me to
translate on the fly.
I'll get into the Bible Gateway.
Please, in the original Greek only.
And we have this translation is the New International Version. You want the King James?
Always.
Yeah, let's go.
That's partially why I'm called James, by the way.
Really? Seriously or not?
No, seriously, yeah.
Okay, there we go. It starts in verse 26, Galatians 3, and Paul writes, so in Christ Jesus you are all children of God through faith, right? This we know. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourself with Christ. You put on Christ. This is Paul's expression, doesn't matter. And there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free. There is nor there is male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. And this, I can't exaggerate the importance and the revolutionary nature of this verse. Because what does Paul tell us here? He tells us the minute you are in relationship with Christ, and doesn't matter exactly what does he mean by that, but the minute you are part of a universal community. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free. There is neither male nor female. He even annihilates or nullifies the basic distinction between male and female. Imagine that. This is the first century CE, right? This is amazing. And why does he do that? This internalization of everything and this placing of the center of weight, of importance inside allows him to make all people all over the world Abraham's seed, right? And I quote, if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. We would think Abraham's seed is of course, genetically connected, right? You would think that is only people who genetically came from Abraham, which is the Jewish people. And of course, since Abraham also begetted Ishmael, it's also the Muslims. But these are the people that came from Abraham. Paul says, no, what's important here is not your bodily, physical, genetic connection to some ancient ancestor. It is actually your spiritual connection to the divine through Christ. And so everybody is now everybody's heirs to the promise, right? Entering into the covenant, and the whole of humanity is God's chosen people now. And this is, of course, the great revolution. I mean, this is what Paul does. This is Christianity, right? This is Christianity saying to Judaism, it's all well and nice. You were great. You had a good run, but now the covenant is being opened up and everybody's invited, right? And so we have universal Christianity. We have the Catholic, i.e., universal church.
So I think that it's worth dwelling just a second longer on this idea, not just through Paul, but through the history of Christianity, just how big this revolution is. Not just in addition to the universalization of it, the idea that religion or that faith is something that happens internally, that is a matter of faith, is a novel idea. And it's very difficult, I think, to even realize that the idea that we have today of religion is, as something that every person has their own set of beliefs, and that's fine. That is, to a degree, a Christian concept of religion.
Yes. And this is also something that came from Paul, because until Paul showed up, it's not only the Jews, the Romans and the Greeks had their worshipful traditions. I don't want to use the word religion too much, but they had certain ways in which to worship the divine. They had traditions. Now, those traditions expressed themselves, manifested themselves as rituals. You would be committed and prescribed and forced to do certain rituals every day or every week or every year, whatever the timeline was. So if you were a Roman citizen, you would be demanded to come to the city square and participate in what we would call today religious rituals, but which were, first of all, communal orchestrated events in which you admitted, or maybe I need another word, you verified sort of your place in society. You were a Roman citizen of a certain city, worshiping the city's divine agent, whatever, the city's deity, and you would do that ritual. And that's now, whatever you felt about it meant nothing. It just didn't matter at all if you were happy about it or not, if you connected or not, if you're mad about it. It doesn't matter. It's not that it doesn't matter, not in the way that you're anyway forced to do it. Of course you're anyway forced to do it. It doesn't matter in a religious way. It doesn't matter for this religion to be effective or to be valid and to be authentic in everybody's eyes. People didn't need to be inwardly persuaded in order to be religious. No, it's exactly the same way in Judaism. It's not that, a traditional Jew gets up in the morning, he prays and puts tefillin. He puts there's this how do you say that in English? James, Adam.
So I have no idea.
Okay, so there's these prayer props. Without I don't want to sound. I mean, I use them every morning, so it's not. I highly respect them. So. But you use these things and you pray out of a book and you read whatever you need to read for the morning prayer, and whether you feel good about it or bad, or you're motivated or not, or you're exalted or you're depressed, it matters nothing. It just doesn't matter at all for this prayer to be valid, not for for in the eyes of the sages, for God to be very happy about it. It's okay. You don't need to like it. It's okay. It's a valid, authentic prayer. And this was the way people understood religion or understood worship. Worship is a technical, orchestrated, ritualistic practice. And of course, and I mean, basically, for many traditional, certainly Orthodox Jews, it's that way till today. Now there were changes, of course, and Hasidism gave us a few different emphasize different things, but that's generally the way it is.
And then Paul turns it over its head.
Right, and Paul says, "Wait a minute, in the same way that not our body is important, but our soul, our inner psyche, etc. What's important about religion, what's important about our connection to the divine, is not going through the motions in a certain ritualistic fashion, but it's meaning, it's emotion, it's an inner transformation, as we said before, it's an inner rebirth of being born again. It's all these inner processes that now take more importance. Now, it's not that there weren't any rituals. Obviously, there were. I mean, these people are still 2,000 years ago. But you can see along the history of Christianity how rituals get shaved off as we proceed. And of course, the Protestant Revolution, makes this its agenda, its very purpose is to say, the sacraments, no, that's actually not true. And the whole monk-nun system is actually, it's bogus. You can let that go. And what we need is only to be in internal sola fide, right? It's just faith. Just faith. That's all you need, as Martin Luther would say. And you can take it to an extreme with what I mean in extreme Protestant sects, like let's say the Quakers or the Shakers, right? And I don't know, do you know how Shakers and Quakers pray?
I've heard of Quaker prayer circles.
So prayer circles, right? So what do they do?
I believe they kind of will be in a room together and they'll just be silent until they're moved, and then they will speak when they're moved. Is that right?
Exactly. So we have here the extreme version of a non-orchestrated prayer, of a non-ritual, of a prayer that you don't even use a book. It's like there's no, preordained or prearranged sequence. It's nothing. It's just you're in the room, and whenever the Holy Spirit descends, you say whatever the Holy Spirit's, inspires you to say. I want us to understand that this is the other extreme of getting up in the morning and praying from a book and going through some motions, whether you are inspired or completely dispirited about it, right? This is the other end, and this is what comes out of the Christian tradition 1,500 years or a few 1,800 years later.
Yeah, I'm cognizant that I know that we definitely want us to move into present day and connect this, but I think before we can get there, I do think we do need to kind of move on from Reformation now to Enlightenment and then eventually secularism. So would you mind talking about how the concept of the image of God kind of transforms or evolves through that timeline?
Right. Okay. So the concept of the image of God, has a lot of it pops up here and there along the Middle Ages. It's, I'll just say, for the fathers of the church, it's also important to free slaves because of the image of God, because the image of God, it's preposterous for anyone to own the image of God, right? Mm. So like St. Augustine, St. Gregory of Nyssa would cry out for abolition. And here we're talking about white slavery, in the literal sense, not in the current sense, right? We're not talking about, these are Europeans enslaving Europeans, right? So it's this, and then it goes and has a duty, or is part of the process of articulating what we today would call human rights, and then we would call them natural rights, because for Christians in the 12th and 13th centuries, the capacity of reason and the capacity of free will were parts of the image of God. There was the understanding that we cannot suppress them. We shouldn't.
That's because if it's all about faith, then without free will, faith is meaningless.
Right. If we want someone to truly be saved, truly believe, truly be in relationship with the divine, how can we constrict their conscience, right? They need to be free to worship as they want, or else it's not valid religion. It's not authentic religion. Again, the opposite of other of more ancient traditions. And it's this string of individualism and of growing internalization that then gets into, it manifests itself also in the English civil wars, in cries out of Puritans and levelers and different Protestant radicals there to let people worship as they want. They called it freedom of conscience, right? We need to be free to worship as we want. These same Puritans, of course, will hop on the Mayflower and other ships and get into New England and eventually be a part of the founding of the United States. And so we have all that ethos here in the States. But when we want to talk about secularism, I'll go back to my example with the Quakers, right? The Quakers perhaps took the idea that only the inner counts and only the inner religion or the inner worship is really important to its most extreme, while still maintaining their Christianity, because the Quakers still believe in Jesus, right? Mm-hmm. But the next logical step is simply saying, well, if whatever is important is our own emotional and conscientious and psychological state and our authenticity to worship, whatever that is, why do we actually need this middleman, this Christ figure, right? And actually, it's not only that, because if really what's important is only our inner convictions, why do we actually need God? And here we can have for the first step, we can have all sorts of new age contemporary spiritual religions. That's basically Christianity without Christ, right? Saying, everybody should go his own way, and whatever you do, just be true to yourself, and express your love for the divine or truth with a capital T, or the one, or whatever, and that's all that's important, right? That's that, and then and the next step is atheism, saying the only important thing really is for you to be a good person and to be true to yourself, not to some divine, however way you want to, but actually to yourself, and just be an authentic person, right? And that's secularism, atheism, existentialism, and that's basically the 19th century and most of the 20th century.
One element of the story that I really enjoyed in the way you laid it out in your book is the more emphasis the culture put on personal will and personal faith, the more it had an urgency of separating church and state, and because you couldn't have any secular power deciding for you what to do or what to believe, because that would contradict the whole purpose of that religion. But that idea moved up so far, got with constant revolutions from Luther through the Enlightenment till today, of constantly people saying, well, actually this thing is infringing on my religion. First it was the Catholic Church, and now it's also Protestantism and maybe Christianity itself that is infringing on our freedom to really be ourselves, which is in the Enlightenment version, be true to reason and to the truth. And then even the idea of God becomes a sort of tyranny over the mind that needs to be banished.
Right. So in the end, and this is also relating to morality. I mean, the question here is, how do I know what's good or bad? How do I know how to act in a justified, in a righteous way? And for people 200 years ago and back, the obvious reason was, God told us. God told us what's good and bad, and it's written in the Bible or in the interpreters of the Bible, and we can just look it up and know. But and for these people, we need to understand, for these people, the thought of understanding, of knowing what's good and bad without the divine guidance was preposterous, was ludicrous. You can't. How would you? How would you know? You just can't know. I mean, and it's a good thing. That's why God gave us the Bible and the prophets and Jesus, whatever, for us to be able to form a society which is based on good, or even a society at all, because otherwise we would all simply kill each other all day. And what happens in the Enlightenment is that the idea of an inner source of morality becomes or is introduced. And suddenly people in different ways think that a person can, out of themselves, understand what's good or bad, either by the use of reason, and Kant would be the archetype here. Just think. If everybody would do whatever you want to do, would it be logically possible and conducive and a good thing? And then you know if it's good or bad. And so it's either reason or a connection to a sort of a natural elan, a sort of natural spirit. Spirit is a bad word. It's an energy that's inside you. If you connect to your naturalness, to your nature, to your inner authentic,
to your authenticity,
your inner authentic core, yes, you will know what's good or bad. You don't need any education, and reason is just an invention. Just look into your heart. Look into your heart and you will know what's good or bad, right? And this is a modern idea. We now take it for granted. It's obvious, but it's a modern idea that this is even possible, conceivable, right? And people start doing it. They either think reasonably what's good or bad, or they delve deep. And this is, and here you have the two arms of the Enlightenment, the Enlightenment per se, and the Romanticism, which is sometimes considered the anti-Enlightenment. But it's still a modern movement that says each and every person can tap into something inside themselves and know what's good or bad. And then, as you said, Adam, what happens is that as people in the West are defensive or are anxious about government or kings or whatever infringing on their freedoms, they become also anxious about the divine infringing about in their freedoms. Not only because they want to be autonomous and free, right, quote unquote. Because if I want to act in a moral way, the only way I can do it is if I am completely free. If the divine instructs me or promises me heaven or scares me with hell, if I do good or bad, that's not really morality, is it? Kant would say, right? I mean, if I do something just out of fear of repercussions or reprimandation, I think, then it's not really, I'm not doing an immoral act. So in order to act morally, I now need God to disappear. I now need to reject the idea of God, because only if I'm totally autonomous can I act in a moral way. And here, and this is articulated beautifully by Charles Taylor, and I'm indebted enormously to Taylor, the Canadian philosopher who wrote about these things in a few books. So it's not my invention or discovery or anything, but I just show what the place of the image of God is in this process. But if we are talking about the image of God here, the image of God, the idea of the image of God, as it were, is flipped on its head, because we are now or the image of God becomes the image of man, or in another way to put it, our inner capacity to be reasonable and to have free will is now disconnected from the divine. We don't want a divine, and is now becomes simply a natural human capacity. And it is with that capacity that we can now engage in constructing, establishing a whole new human society, which the Enlightenment set out to do.
And the end result of it is defending a president of the United States for his behavior by saying that he is true to his authentic self.
Right. Yeah, and here, and you're pointing at the negative, the downside of authenticity, the whole culture of authenticity. And again, Charles Taylor wrote a whole book about it, The Ethics of Authenticity. Authenticity is a great thing, but it has a few, it can, too much of it, or let's say it can become sort of corrupted if you take it too seriously, let's say. Or if you don't understand its dynamics, because people today seem to think that anything I choose to do is considered authentic. Actually, it doesn't work that way. But whatever I do always has a context, and it's not that if I order a Big Mac, I can proclaim that it's my authentic self manifesting itself, right? Nobody will take me seriously if I do that. Certain things are considered authentic and certain things are not. But what authenticity also allows is, and if we take the example of Trump, what Trump displays is a certain kind of authenticity. It is the authenticity of having no buffer between his internal and external manifestations or expressions, right? Whatever he thinks, he says. There's no buffer, right? And this is considered in our culture a supremely authentic act, a supremely authentic deed. This person says what he thinks. I mean, this person just blurts it out, and he's very blunt, and he's very direct, and he doesn't mince words, and he says it as it is, etc. And paradoxically, and this is the interesting thing here, Trump can be authentic while lying. Okay? So he doesn't have to be truthful in order to be conceived by his followers, I wanted to say, by his voters, I don't know, whatever, as authentic. And that's what happens, right? And we value authenticity today so much that to be considered authentic is much more important than to be considered truthful.
Right.
Because he is committed to a truth. It's his truth. It's not.
It's not a truth. I would say he's committed to himself and his own well-being and, I don't know, power and glory and whatever. That's what he's committed to, and he does this in a very direct and blunt way. And this is conceived as authentic, and people are drawn to that sort of charisma that is the authentic person just doing their thing.
I feel like that's why it's so much harder for female politicians to often win. I feel like most times, for some reason, when it's a female politician, there's like the sense that they're not their authentic self. They're putting this on. I can't trust her, et cetera, et cetera.
I think female politicians will anyway be much more calculated and much more apprehensive of what they say and how they sound, and how they how their image is built, and anyway will then be perceived as more calculated and so less authentic. And by the way, here again, we can see the dichotomy that we talked about, the dichotomy between ritualistic, mechanical behavior and inner expression, right? Mm-hmm. It's the same binary, duo playing itself out. And today, living in a Christian world, basically we're all Protestants, right? I mean, psychologically, that's what we are. And being and living and as normally or not, as Protestants, we are drawn to that authenticity, and we reject ritual. I mean, that's the culture we live in. It's a culture that rejects ritual, rejects law, and praises authenticity, feeling, expression, etc.
So is that it? Recognizing that context of where we are now, is that part of the reason that you were compelled to write this book at this moment in time?
Wow, well, thanks for this question. Yeah, yes. And here, my non-Protestant self, whatever left of it, being studying the Jewish tradition, being a Jew, and understanding, at least that's my opinion, that ritual, tradition, external manners, customs, these things are important, and not even saying they're the most important, but they are important for every human society. And indeed, a human society cannot function properly without ritual, and without customs, and without manners, and without relying only on authenticity. It's just not possible. It will break apart. It will fragment into individuals doing their thing. But there will be no society to speak of. And understanding this, yes, it also pushed me to write a book about how we got to this place, and maybe point a few flaws in what we perceive as the obvious reality today.
So as somebody who I guess has a very strong Lutheranian streak, I get irritants just hearing words like
tradition, or
Right.
we need to get more rituals and more customs. Society is lacking that, or maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but that's one of the core mental, spiritual things that society is missing right now. I need to be convinced of that. I need to be convinced that bringing back some, or not necessarily bringing back, but having a set of customs, having something that is this unifying thing, will not turn into a new form of cultural oppression.
I hear you. I mean, personally, I'm an advocate and I'm an activist for freedom of religion in Israel. Israel doesn't have as much freedom of religion as the United States, certainly, and some would say it's lacking freedom of religion. And so this is something that I'm thinking about myself. This is a concern that I have myself. And so I want to also correct what you say. I'm not suggesting we introduce rituals into our lives or we introduce more laws into our lives. It's not the thing at all, and it won't even work if everybody agrees. Rituals are not something that can be forced upon people. But I mean, two things. First, what I want to achieve is, or one of the things I want to achieve is for people, first of all, to understand that ritual has its place. And that our innate, so to speak, rejection of ritual, our allergic reaction to any mentioning of ritual, custom, tradition, is a certain cultural stance that we have inherited from our Protestant forefathers, so to speak, right? It's one way of understanding human society and human culture, but it's certainly not a universal, eternal way of understanding. And to understand that it has its drawbacks, it has its flaws. And if we understand that, we will then understand a new ritual and the importance of ritual. So that first of all is my objective. Secondly, obviously, we will always have to strike some sort of balance. I mean, too much ritual is also, it's not only, it's not only constraining and basically would snuff the life out of us. It's something that we simply can't agree to today. I mean, I like to give a simple example. I mean, and this is an example I give to Orthodox Jews I talk to, which do want to, let's simply introduce some more rituals, or let's introduce the halakha, the Jewish law, or let's force it upon people, and it will work. It will, people will actually be convinced that it's good for them the minute they have a few months of forced, ritual. And I say, this is like suggesting to people that they will be happy today with arranged marriages. Okay? And if you think about it, until 100, 200 years ago, tops, we would all get married by fixed marriage, by arranged marriage. Right? That's the way people did it. And again, this is something that is traditional. It's a custom. And it's something that had, it did not, the condition was not that you fall in love. The condition was not that you love your spouse, your future spouse, but that you got along, right? And it's something that we today see as basically as a monstrosity. It's something that we can't even start to comprehend, and certainly not go back to. So saying to people today, throw out your authentic ethics and your spiritual minded religion and etc., and embrace ritualistic, mechanical traditions, is the same as saying to them, give up your dreams about falling in love and finding the exact person that you are in, your soulmate, or you're having some inner connection to, and simply, I'll find you a good husband or a good wife. That should be enough for you. And people obviously won't accept this, not in a million years, right? It's it's a non-starter. So there's no going back in a simple way. There's no, we're not going to be Talmudic sages again, and most people are not going to be Orthodox Jews, and even Orthodox Jews are today managing and I don't want to say manipulating because it's a negative word, but they have ways to make the halachic system, the Jewish law, work inside or with our natural inclination towards spirituality and authenticity. We're not 2,000 years ago. We are today. So in that way, simply going back won't work. It will never work. But again, what I want to do is for people to understand that what they are today is limited in a few ways. It's limiting them and it's limiting society. Not in all ways. It's good, but in certain ways, and that a new appreciation of ritual, of tradition, of custom, of something that is not measured only by its authenticity can be beneficial to them and to society.
I think putting aside the extreme example of Trump, what can you kind of elaborate? What do you mean by what we lose by having so much emphasis on individuality?
I mean, it's easy, and you don't need me for that because, conservative pundits or what have been saying this for the last 50 years. Basically, fragmentation, right? It's a culture of self-fulfillment that has disregard for society. It's breaking down very important societal structures that that are important for the continuing prosperity of our own society. So, I don't want to get into examples because it will make me seem too neocon but we all understand that a society that is only made up of individuals, that has no common ethos and common objective and a common solidarity cannot work. And solidarity does not come simply by respecting the other, whomever they are. That doesn't work. I mean, it's a good idea, but in actuality, it doesn't play out. And we need some sort of common ethos. We need some sort of common vision that we all aspire to. And each nation or each ethnic group does this differently, but we can't actually forego that completely.
And then in your book and what you're arguing, are you then arguing that the thing that could be the basis of that common ethos is a common definition of the image of God?
No, I'm not. And this book is more descriptive than prescriptive. It's really just understanding the journey that we've made till today and how that journey defines us and defines our society. And in the end word, I will maybe say that we also we need to think how we progress from here. But this, a whole roadmap of how to do that will maybe be a subject for another book.
So then, to just trying to understand, then, do you have what could that common ethos look like, or is there a moment in history or a time period where you would turn to and say that was a time when society had some sort of common ethos that was more successful?
It's easy. Let's take the United States in the 50s and the 60s. There was a very strong ethos of, on the one hand, the Constitution, the United States civil religion, civic religion. It's the Constitution, it's the rights, it's the federal government, it's our here, the Americans, our struggle against the quote-unquote evil empire of the Bolsheviks, of the Soviets. It's all these things that coalesced around them, a nation that obviously had a lot of drawbacks and disinfringement of people here. And of course, rather, women and minorities, etc. But there was some sort of common ethos which led this nation forward. Now, today, this common ethos has broken down, I won't say completely, but in a very significant way. And here you might argue, well, that's good because now we have a more egalitarian or equitous society. And I would say the more egalitarian and equitous society is actually a continuation of that ethos and not a result of the breaking down of that ethos. But that's an argument we can have. But in any way, I would say an ethos is needed.
You mentioned it at the beginning, but you are in Israel in terms of your political activism or your political writing in Israel. You're very much on the left. You are a strong defender of whatever remains of the Israeli left.
Yeah.
And an incredibly strong voice against religious coercion in Israel.
Right.
But here, and you've just published an article regarding the American left, and your position about it is a little bit different. Specifically, the American left that espouses this generic term, identity politics. But this is something that you do have a strong criticism of here.
Yeah, but it's also in Israel. It's also an Israeli, fad. I mean, and here it's also connected to whatever we said. Identity politics is also a manifestation of that inwardness, of that accentuation of whatever I feel that I am, etc. Now, I'm not rejecting all identity politics. I think identity politics in its classical form, meaning the struggle for a certain group's inclusion in equality before the law and rights and protections of rights, etc., is important. And the civil struggle or the civil struggles in the 60s for women, for blacks, etc., was certainly very important. I'm talking about a certain development of identity politics. You can, and then in the article I call it identitarianism, which does not wish to share or to get an equal share in the national cake, but to reject the whole cake, or basically to say this whole structure, this whole liberal structure, which today is the common sense public sphere, is in fact a hegemonic, patriarchic, Western, white or Christian invention, and we reject it thoroughly in the name of freedom and equality, which are actually the very values that it itself espouses. But we reject it, and we want our own way of doing things, etc. I think this sort of identity politics, this sort of isolationist identity politics, is first of all very much invested in the inner worlds of feelings and reactions and experiences, and that's how we get microaggressions and trigger warnings, etc. And I think it's eroding whatever is left of the liberal framework of the public sphere, which I think is still very much necessary and beneficial for the equality and well-being of everybody.
Can we sit on that for a second? Because I think that for you, this is probably going to feel like a very basic question. But I'm not someone who's been kind of not in academia. I haven't spent a lot of time thinking, understanding why this liberal framework of the public sphere is the infrastructure that could be civilization's greatest hope for freedom and equality. Okay. So would you mind just expounding on that a bit about why it's worth fighting for and maintaining?
Okay, that's great. That's a great question. Okay, let's start with modern society. Modern Western society, at least, is very very diverse. First of all, maybe the first very obvious characteristic is that we are very diverse. There are a lot of ethnic groups, a lot of religions, a lot of sexual orientations, a lot of people doing their own different things, because we are in a very a late stage of modern individualism, and this individualism diversifies itself. That's what it does. And if we want to make it work, to have all these people live in one place and get along, we need some sort of structure. Now, we can force some sort of preordained idea of what society should look like, and then we can have either, okay, we all need to be proletariat, avant-garde revolutionaries that will usher in a new age of equality. Yeah, that's an idea, right? That's an idea that people tried to force on entire countries, and you can see how that worked out. Or we can have, okay, we are all actually Shiite Muslims that need to keep the commandments of the Muslim faith in loyalty to our tradition, etc. And you can see in Iran how that works out. And what liberalism gives us is a structure, is a framework in which we don't decide in advance of the trajectory of the whole population. And I'm talking in generalizations, but in generalizations it's true. We really give out a minimum framework in which people simply can get along. So there are laws, meaning you can't murder, rape, commit, steal, etc. But other than that, I'm not telling you how to live a good life. I'm not telling you how to orchestrate, how to establish your righteousness, your how to express whatever I think is a good life, is a decent life, is a righteous life. You decide that for yourself. That's the pursuit of happiness thing in the Declaration of Independence. You decide your right is to pursue your happiness however you think is right. And this, I think, is a model that works for a very diverse society, which is basically modern society, I would say, anywhere, certainly in the West. It works because it gives the framework, and then you yourself have to decide what you want to do with your life. You're not going to be forced. Okay, now this model has drawbacks, it has flaws. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying it's the only thing that works in such a society as we are in today. Now, and so what identitarian types, certainly some of them want to do is reject this model, saying this model is actually Western, Protestant, white, logocentric, whatever. And so it's not us, it's not catering to our authentic selves as, I don't know, whatever, I'm not going to mention anybody. Mm-hmm. And we're going to reject it. Now, and I just don't think that will work. I just don't think you can replace this model with another model that will, on one hand, maintain everybody's opportunity to express their own way, their own pursuit of happiness, and on the other hand, still maintain a structure that is a viable, allows for a viable society. I cannot think of an alternative. Now, of course, these identitarians think they have alternatives, right? I don't buy into that, and I don't think it will work. I don't think it will work for the same reason that Bolshevism didn't work, and for the same reason that the theocracy in Iran doesn't work today. If you don't allow our diverse population to express itself for each and every one to express themselves as they want, it's not going to work. You will need violence to make it work in another way of expressing.
You are describing a paradox in a way. The story that you told in your wonderful book
is exactly how this type of pluralism is the result of hyper-individualism, which is the result of a Christian European story. And
exactly.
And how? But then when this project has whether you call it succeeded or reached its current state, where you do have a diverse society that of people coming from different stories, and those people feel that, well, now you're trapping me in your Christian story. How do you solve it? Because that's a true grievance.
That's right. I mean, you're on to me. When these identitarians say, look, this story is white, Christian, Western, logocentric, they're actually right. That's true. It is a product of the Judeo-Christian tradition. After 2,000 years of process, that's what you get. Yes, it is a Western culture, a cultural idea. That's true. And I have to say, and first of all, as I said before, it has its drawbacks, it has its flaws, and also it has a major drawback being a specific story of a specific culture. That's true. The question is, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? Is there another system that works? And as far as I know, I don't know of another system that works.
Works in the sense of being able to accommodate for this diversity, you mean?
Right. Because what I'm saying is, let's say give me an example of a group that won't be offended. I don't know. Let's say Jews, right? when being a Jew, of course, I can say whatever I want. Ultra-Orthodox Jews saying, listen, this whole liberal, individualistic, self-fulfillment, emotional, expressivist, authenticist, etc. culture is Christian. What do you want from me? I want to live in another culture. And I'm saying to them, it's okay. You can have your own neighborhoods and your own schools and your own pursuit of happiness. It's okay. You can do it, but you cannot force your way on everybody else. So now I'm not naive. I don't think it's, totally, everybody can have their own way in a perfect manner. Obviously not. And as I said before, we are all in a way Protestant. Yes, that's true. It affects us. It shapes us. And yet, that's the best we can do right now. And yes, you can say, well, who asked the United States to make its own cultural logic the cultural logic of the whole world, or at least the whole Western world? And basically, it's it's slowly, encompassing the whole world. Who asked them? This is cultural colonialism. And again, that's true in a way. That's, I can't deny that this is actually what's happening. But the fact of the matter is that this is what's happening. Christianity won the day. That's it. That we are living in a Christian world, so to speak. Of course, not everybody believes in Jesus, obviously. So Christianity, in the end, also, sowed the seeds of its own ruin in a way. But we are living in a culturally Christian world. Yes, we are. And there's nothing we can do about it. I mean, unless you, of course, fly off to the Sahara Desert and found a city there or whatever. Basically, there's nothing you can do about it. Now, being in such a world and in such a society and in such a culture, we now have to ask what will make it work and what is the alternative. And I will say just one more thing about this. When asked what is the alternative, when identitarians, whether radical LGBTs or Native Americans or Mizrahi Jews in Israel or Orthodox Jews or whatever, when asked, not Orthodox Jews, but usually the activist identitarians, the people who are in the West and are radical leftists, right? When asked what will their new society be based on, or what values will their new society express, they usually say, well, everybody will be equal and everybody will be free. Now, with all due respect, that's again just copying the liberal ethos. That's liberalism. You're doing it in an anti-liberal way, but you're presuming, or you're proclaiming, or the presumption is that in the end everybody will. We're against liberalism, but in the end we'll be more liberal than the best liberal, right? We'll be more free and more equal. So basically, these people have already internalized liberal values, but they just think that liberalism itself, being a Christian, Western, whatever tradition, is not for them. But they're not going back to their traditional, to their own tradition. An example I mentioned in my article, the article is in Hebrew, by the way, I'm sorry. But I mentioned Andrea Dworkin. Andrea Dworkin, a radical feminist who in the 70s, 80s, 90s wrote a lot and said that they should found a new society only of women. And she said every woman should be lesbian and we should only be women by ourselves, and that's it, right? So that's basically rejecting the current society, rejecting the liberal order, and saying we should do something else. But what were the characteristics of this new society? It was, of course, even more equal and even more free than our own society. So if that's all you have to offer, basically you've already bought in to the liberal ethos. You're just saying, I have a better idea of how to do it. And I don't think you have a better idea of how to do it. Nobody wants to return to the patriarchal, constraining, religiously coercing traditions of 200 years ago.
I'm very much aware of your generosity with time, so I don't want to keep you longer, but I do want to give you a chance to burnish your liberal credentials, and just because you have to have those disclaimers nowadays, and I do want to give you a chance to talk about Israel as well, because what better way to spend your last 5 minutes of a talk than just go on this minor topic of Israeli politics. We just came out of a third round elections, and we might be going into a fourth round. What are the fault lines?
Good question. I mean, Israel has been through a hell of a year and a half. I mean, we've had 3 elections, maybe the fourth now. I mean, I don't want to go too much into that. It's basically the story of one very corrupt person, which is Benjamin Netanyahu, a person who is right now, at least, concerned only about their own personal future. He's standing to trial for bribery and fraud and breach of trust, and that's his concern, and that's why we've been through all these elections. But if you take a broader, zoom out and look at the Israeli society, I would characterize it with 2 major trends or major ways of Jewish Israelis expressing their Jewish identity. The one is connected to what we call in Israel the Jewish Renaissance or the Jewish Awakening, which is secular Israelis re-engaging, rediscovering their own tradition, and shaping their Jewish engagement in many, many different ways, all of them pluralistic, as we say, liberal-minded and individualistic in a way. So they may study Talmud, or they may engage in Neo-Kabbalah or Neo-Hasidism, or they may form groups which they, celebrate the Sabbath together, Friday evening together, etc. Many different things going on. And this is an expression of individualistic secular Jews seeking for a new way of defining their Judaism. It's a new way because the old way, the old labor movement, Zionism, really broke down. It's been breaking down since the 70s, and it totally broke down, I would say, in the 90s, basically. And since then, there's this search for a new way of defining themselves. So that would more characterize the left side of the political spectrum. And so it's also more liberal-minded, democratically oriented, civic society oriented, etc. And in the more And more to the right, we have another major trend in Jewish identity shaping in Israel, which is also the result of the breakdown of classical Zionism, I would say, which we can call we can simply call ethno-nationalism. This is another way of expressing your Jewishness. It's expressing your Jewishness as a bloodline, as part of the Jewish ethnos, part of the Jewish ethnic community, and you perform that identity by being very patriotic, very right-wing, very loud about it, and very loud against people who are not patriotic enough in your eyes. So right-wingers would this is a generalization, obviously, but this ethno-national identity takes itself as the only authentic Israeli Jewish identity, and the others have, as Netanyahu once whispered in the ear of a certain rabbi, the left has forgotten how to be Jewish. The others have forgotten how to be Jewish. They are, they're playing around, but they're not loyal enough to the blood and soil and ethnic community that they should be loyal to. So these are, this I would say is the these are the trajectories in a bird's eye view. And if you look at the Israeli society through them, you can understand certain trends. Like you can understand that the whole blue and white coalition, the center-left coalition, is this sort of Jewish identity. It's a Jewish identity that is not very traditional. It is individualistic. It is liberal. It is progressive, and when manifesting politically, it cares about the rule of law, it cares about Israeli democracy, and so it's for the two-state solution, etc., etc., etc. And if you look to the right, again, broadly speaking, you see a different agenda, a different set of priorities. It cares about, first and foremost, the ethnic Jewish people, its safety, its longevity, its prosperity, and that agenda, that the value that they place on this ethnocentric view really trumps almost anything else. It trumps Israeli rule of law, because Netanyahu, their leader, is indicted and on trial, but it doesn't matter because he keeps us safe, because he is our protector. And it trumps. It certainly trumps. Care or being worried enough about what will happen with the Palestinian situation, right? So because the status quo is at the moment positive,
for Israelis.
For Israelis, that was my next two words. For Israelis, it's okay that we don't move towards a solution. Yeah, of course, the rights of Palestinians are being trampled every day, but what can we do? And the most important thing is the viability or the protection of the Jewish people. So you can see how that works out, how that Jewish identity influences how these people understand also politics.
Is that Jewish identity, though, or is that the global trend of the global right towards ethno-nationalism?
Right, that's a great question. Of course, it's part of that global trend. Yes, it's part. This is the Israeli version of that global trend of populism, of nationalism. Yes, but in Israel, it has its own Jewish bent. Yeah. And again, this is influenced also by the breakdown, I would say, of classical Zionism, of the classical secular Zionist identity that held up, nicely from the 20s till the 70s, and offered another way for Israelis to be secularly Jewish and both patriotic and democratically minded, or at least caring for the Israeli democracy as a primal objective. That's gone.
Any last positive thoughts to end us on, or
It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be positive. It could actually be the most pessimistic thought you have right now in your head.
I will say two things. I will say that the Israeli society is a vibrant, bubbling, creative society, and I love it, and I think it has enormous potential. And I will say a funny thing, but I will say, were it not for the whole Palestinian thing, we would have made it great. But we, of course, have the Palestinian thing, and so
the Palestinian thing being an occupation of
the occupation of the West Bank, and the siege over Gaza,
and some political inequality for Arab Israelis.
Yeah. I mean, but that's. I mean, I'm
just giving a crash course for the Israeli crisis.
But the basic things, the occupation, of course, the most damaging, and I would say even in a long-term fatal problem for Israel is a military occupation of a few million people. That's basic. So now, having that, being engaged in that, the future of Israel will hinge on Israel's ability to separate from the Palestinians and give them their own right of self-determination and statehood. And what I can say both optimistically and pessimistically is that the status quo is not viable. And sooner or later things will change dramatically, because it's just a matter, I think, of Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian leader, Abu Mazen, as we call him in Israel, passing on. And I wish him a long and peaceful life, but he is not a young person, not a young man, and sooner or later there will erupt a succession struggle, and that's when you can expect major things to change, because Israel will either have to interrupt that, to maybe send its military, and anyway, things will change. So the status quo, even though the right thinks it's totally okay and maybe and viable, etc., it's not, and it will change. And this is both pessimistic and optimistic, meaning that it can change for the worst, but it also can be a catalyst for a final, solution in a good way, I think. That's basically it. But this is really a subject for a whole, a whole hour of talk. So at least,
I see that as the dessert conversation, just a little bit about the coming doom of the Israeli status quo. Tomer, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
it's wonderful, and to say again, it's always such a pleasure to read your commentary, and your book was wonderful, and I can't wait for it to come out
and then be translated into English.
Yeah. Yes, if any of our listeners knows of wants to fund the translation, yes.
Thank you. Have a great night, Tomer.
Great, you too. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Uncertain Things. Check out our blog on uncertain.substack.com, and you can follow Tomer at Tomer Persico on Twitter. Stay sane.